Saladin, born Yusuf in Tikrit, Iraq, hailed from a Kurdish family with roots in the village of Ajdanakan, near Dvin in Armenia. His family, assimilated into the Arabic-speaking world, had ties to the Rawadia tribe. His father, Nam ad-Din Ayyub, served as a warden of Tikrit, where they provided refuge to Zengi's defeated army in 1132. Later, due to a conflict with Mujahid al-Din Biruz, they were banished from Tikrit and settled in Mosul. Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, it's good to meet you. And if you're coming back, it's great to have you here again for another video. Today, we are going to look at Saladin, the great commander of the Muslim forces during the Crusades. If you'd like to support the channel, head on over to my Patreon, or just like, comment and subscribe to help YouTube push this out to more viewers. Now without further ado, let's begin. Saladin's childhood in Damascus is veiled in mystery, but his education was comprehensive. While he displayed proficiency in various subjects, including Euclid and arithmetic, his deep understanding of the Quran and religious studies distinguished him from his peers. Despite academic prowess, he leaned more towards religious studies, likely influenced by the capture of Jerusalem during the First Crusade. Saladin's linguistic skills were impressive, encompassing Kurdish, Arabic, Turkish, and Persian, showcasing his intellectual breadth and cultural adaptability. Saladin's religious beliefs and practices reflect a deep commitment to Orthodox Sunni Islam, characterized by piety, devotion to jihad, and opposition to heterodox movements. According to Baha ad-Din Shahad, Saladin was a devout Muslim who found solace in Quran recitations, prayed regularly, and exhibited a strong aversion to philosophies and beliefs that were contrary to the most orthodox version of Islam. His reverence for the sacred texts and adherence to religious rituals underscored his unwavering commitment to his faith. Despite his opposition to certain Sufi individuals, Saladin was a patron of Sufi institutions, including khanqahs and zawiyas in Egypt and Syria. His endorsement of Sufism reflects his recognition of its spiritual value within Islam, and his desire to promote religious devotion and piety among his subjects. His dedication to jihad was a central aspect of his religious identity. He viewed jihad as a sacred duty and exhibited zeal in its pursuit, prioritizing military endeavors over many other activities. His unwavering focus on jihad exemplifies his commitment to defending Islam and combating its enemies. His actions against individuals like Khadid al-Kafaz and Yahya al-Surawadi, whom he perceived as deviating from orthodox Islamic teachings, highlight his staunch opposition to heterodox movements. His efforts to suppress groups like the Order of Assassins underscore his commitment to upholding Sunni orthodoxy and combating perceived threats to Islamic unity and integrity. Saladin's patronage of khanqahs and zawiyas was not only a means of fostering spiritual growth, but also of promoting religious knowledge and piety among his closest subjects. By endowing these institutions, Saladin sought to create environments conducive to religious scholarship and orthodoxy, furthering the dissemination of Sunni teachings and practices. Now, on to Saladin's military career. His military career began under the guidance of his uncle, Asad ad-Din Shirkuh, a prominent military leader serving under Nur ad-Din, the Zengid emir of Damascus and Aleppo. Saladin's education and training in military affairs were heavily influenced by Shirkuh, who played a pivotal role in shaping his nephew's military prowess. In 1163, the Fatimid vizier Shawar sought military assistance from Nur ad-Din to reclaim his position in Egypt, which had been usurped by his rival Dirgham. Nur ad-Din dispatched Shirkuh, accompanied by Saladin, who was then 26 years old, to support Shawar's cause. Saladin's involvement in this expedition was initially a minor one, tasked with logistical duties such as collecting supplies from Bilbais before its siege by the combined forces of the Crusades and Shawar's troops. However, Saladin's role expanded during the ensuing Battle of Al-Balbain, fought on the desert border of the Nile. Positioned on the right wing of the Zengid army, Saladin played a crucial role in the battle's outcome. Muslim sources indicate that Saladin was initially stationed in the baggage of the center, with instructions to lure the enemy into a trap by feigning a retreat. Despite early successes by the Crusader force, the unforgivable terrain ultimately hindered their progress, and Saladin's tactical maneuvering contributed to the Zengid victory. This battle, the Battle of Al-Balbain, is regarded as one of the most notable victories in Saladin's early military career, although the extent of the triumph remains debated among historians. Following the battle, Saladin and Shirkuh proceeded towards Alexandria, where they received a warm welcome and additional resources. However, faced with a superior Crusader Egyptian force besieging the city, Shirkuh opted to divide his army, with Saladin entrusted with defending Alexandria, while the main force took its chance to withdraw. In the power struggle over Egypt, Shirkuh found himself at odds with Shawar and Amalric I of Jerusalem, leading to Shawar's request for assistance from Amalric. In 1169, Shawar was reportedly assassinated, with Saladin implicated in his death, and Shirkuh passed away later that year. Following Shirkuh's demise, several candidates were considered for the vizier role to Al-Adid, most of whom were Kurds. The ethnic solidarity among the Kurds influenced the Ayyubid's family's political maneuvers, with Saladin and his inner circle cautious of Turkish influence. Despite Nur ad-Din selecting a successor for Shirkuh, Al-Adid appointed Saladin to replace Shawar as a vizier. The rationale behind the Shia Caliph Al-Adid's selection of Saladin, a Sunni, varies among historical records. Ibn al-Athir suggests that Saladin was chosen due to his perceived weakness and a lack of obedience among the other emirs, although he eventually gained their acceptance after negotiations. Others speculate that Saladin's appointment was engineered by Al-Adid's advisors to weaken the Syria-based Zengids, or based on his family's reputation for generosity and military prowess. Inaugurated as vizier on the 26th of March, Saladin underwent a transformation, renouncing wine drinking and adopting an even more devout religious demeanor. Despite gaining considerable power and influence, Saladin grappled with loyalty conflicts between al-Adid and Nur ad-Din. Later that year, Saladin faced internal challenges, including an assassination attempt orchestrated by Egyptian soldiers and emirs. With intelligence from his chief, Ali ibn Safyan, Saladin thwarted the conspiracy, arresting and executing the chief conspirator. Subsequently, a revolt erupted involving black African soldiers and Egyptian factions that were opposed to Saladin's rule. But by the 23rd of August, Saladin had decisively quelled the uprising, solidifying his grip on power in Cairo. Towards the end of 1169, Saladin, reinforced by troops by Nur ad-Din, achieved a significant victory over a large Crusader Byzantine coalition near Damietta. Following this success, in the spring of 1170, Nur ad-Din complied with Saladin's request and sent his father to Egypt. This move was encouraged by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mustanjid, who sought to pressure Saladin into deposing his rival Caliph al-Ad. Saladin, meanwhile, continued to consolidate his power in Egypt and expand his support base. In an effort to solidify his authority, Saladin appointed family members to prominent positions and initiated the construction of several religious institutions. He commissioned the building of a college for the Maliki sect of Sunni Islam in the city, as well as another for the Shafi denomination to which he belonged, located in Al-Fustat. Having established himself in Egypt, Saladin turned his attention to the Crusaders and launched a campaign against them, laying siege to Darum in 1170. In response, King Amalric withdrew his Templar garrison from Gaza to reinforce the defense of Darum. Despite this, Saladin managed to outmaneuver the Crusader forces and capture Gaza in 1187. Subsequently, in 1191, Saladin destroyed the fortifications in Gaza that had been constructed by King Baldwin III for the Knights Templar. So around the same time as this, around 1191, Saladin targeted the Crusader castle of Eilat, situated on the island at the head of the Gulf of Aqaba. Although the castle did not pose a significant threat to Muslim naval passage, it could harass smaller Muslim ships, and that is a problem. Therefore, Saladin decided to capture and dismantle it, and he did, further securing his control over the region. According to Imad ad-Din, Nur ad-Din urged Saladin in June 1171 to re-establish the Abbasid Caliphate in Egypt, a task that Saladin carried out no more than 2 months later. This decision was further encouraged by Najm al-Din ad-Kabushani, a prominent Shafi fiqh who opposed Shia rule in Egypt. Saladin coordinated the execution of several Egyptian emirs, presenting their deaths to al-Adid as a suppression of the rebellion. Al-Adid subsequently fell ill, or was perhaps poisoned. While on his deathbed, he requested Saladin's visit to care for his younger children. However, fearing treachery against the Abbasids, Saladin declined the request, a decision he later regretted upon learning of Al-Adid's intentions. Al-Adid passed away on the 13th of September, and 5 days later the Abbasid Caliphate was reinstated in Cairo and Al-Fustat, with Al-Mustadi proclaimed as the new caliph. On the 25th of September, Saladin departed to Cairo to participate in a joint attack on Kerak and Montreal, the desert castles of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, alongside Nur ad-Din, who would attack from Syria. However, Saladin withdrew back to Cairo upon receiving reports of increased support from Crusader leaders for traitors within Egypt, aimed at weakening his power. Nur ad-Din proceeded with the attack alone. During the summer of 1173, a Nubian army, along with the Armenian former Fatimid troops, assembled on the Egyptian border, preparing to besiege Aswan. Saladin sent reinforcements under his brother Turan Shah to assist the emir of Aswan. The Nubians were repelled, but they later returned in that year and were once again defeated. Egyptian forces, led by Turan Shah, advanced from Aswan and captured the Nubian town of Ibrim. Saladin, while transporting goods to Damascus as a gift for Nur ad-Din, utilized the opportunity to conduct raids on Crusader territory, targeting Muslim Bedouins living there to deprive the Franks of their guides. In the July of the same year, 1173, Saladin's father, Ayyub, was injured on a horse-riding incident and passed away on the 9th of August. In the same year, Saladin dispatched Turan Shah to conquer Yemen, incorporating it and its port, Aden, into the territories of the Ayyubid dynasty. In the early summer of 1174, Nur ad-Din began mustering an army, sending summons to various regions including Mosul, Diyarbakir, and the Jazira, indicating potential preparations for an attack against Saladin's Egypt. In response to these developments, the Ayyubids held a council to assess the threat, and Saladin gathered his troops outside of Cairo. However, on the 15th of May, Nur ad-Din passed away after falling ill. Power was then transferred to his 11-year-old son, As-Salih Ismail al-Malik. Nur ad-Din's death afforded Saladin greater political independence, and in a letter to As-Salih, he pledged to act as a sword against their enemies, describing Nur ad-Din's demise as an earthquake shock. Following Nur ad-Din's death, Saladin had faced a crucial decision. He could either lead his army against the Crusaders from Egypt, wait for an invitation from As-Salih in Syria to come to his aid and launch war from there, or simply take it upon himself to annex Syria. However, Saladin hesitated to attack a land that had previously belonged to his master, fearing it would be perceived as hypocritical and render him unfit to lead the war against the Crusaders. He recognized that to acquire Syria, he needed either an invitation from As-Salih or to warn him of the potential dangers from Crusader threats. As-Salih was later relocated to Aleppo under the guardianship of Gumush-Tigin, the emir of the city, and a veteran captain of Nur ad-Din's forces. Gumush-Tigin planned to eliminate all rivals in Syria and the Jazira, starting with Damascus. When the emir of Damascus sought assistance against Aleppo from Saif ad-Din of Mosul, who was a cousin of Gumush-Tigin, his request was refused. Consequently, the Syrians turned to Saladin for help, which he accepted. Saladin rode swiftly across the desert with 700 chosen horsemen, passing through Al-Karak before reaching Bosra. Upon his arrival in Damascus on the 23rd of November, he was greeted with acclaim. Despite initial resistance from the citadel of Damascus, Saladin's forces, led by his brother Tugtakin ibn Ayyub, successfully secured the surrender of the citadel after a brief siege. Saladin then established himself in the castle and received the homage and greetings of the city's inhabitants. Following his triumph at Damascus, Saladin delegated his brother Tugtakin ibn Ayyub as the governor of Damascus, and then set out to conquer other cities previously under the authority of Nur ad-Din, but now practically autonomous. He swiftly seized Hama, encountering little resistance, but refrained from attacking Homs due to the formidable strength of its citadel. Saladin then turned his sights towards Aleppo, besieging the city on the 30th of December after its ruler, Gumush-Tigin, refused to relinquish power. During the siege of Aleppo, As-Salih, fearing capture by Saladin, appealed to the city's inhabitants not to surrender to the invading force. To thwart Saladin's progress, Gumush-Tigin sought assistance from Rashid ad-Din Sinan, chief Dai of the assassins of Syria, who attempted to assassinate Saladin in his camp. However, the plot had failed, and Saladin's forces maintained their siege. In May 1175, Saladin faced significant resistance from Raymond of Tripoli, who gathered his forces to launch an attack on Muslim territory. Responding strategically, Saladin redirected his efforts towards Homs, later capturing its citadel in March 1175 after fierce resistance. These victories, however, alarmed Saif ad-Din, head of the Zengids, who perceived Saladin's actions as a challenge to his family's authority over Syria and Mesopotamia. In a decisive confrontation at the Horns of Hama on the 13th of April 1175, Saladin's forces routed the combined armies of Mosul and Aleppo, forcing As-Salih's advisors to acknowledge Saladin's control over Damascus, Homs, and Hama, as well as other key several towns. Subsequently, Saladin proclaimed himself king and suppressed As-Salih's name in Friday prayers and Islamic coinage. As the power struggle between the Ayyubids and Zengids persisted, Saladin continued to consolidate his rule. In a significant turn of events, he forged a mutual alliance with Aleppo, allowing its rulers to maintain control over the city while recognizing Saladin as the sovereign ruler of all conquered territories. This strategic move solidified Saladin's authority in Syria and paved the way for future expansion of his empire. Saladin's strategic maneuvers included truces with both his Zengid rivals and the Kingdom of Jerusalem, solidifying the temporary peace agreements to focus on other challenges. However, he faced a significant threat from the Ismaili sect, commonly known as the Assassins, led by Rashid ad-Din Sinan. Occupying 9 fortresses strategically positioned in the An-Nusayriya Mountains, the Assassins posed a formidable obstacle to Saladin's ambitions. In August 1176, Saladin led his army into the An-Nusayriya range to confront the Assassins face to face. Despite laying waste to the surrounding countryside, Saladin's forces failed to capture any of the Assassins' forts, and ultimately retreated after facing staunch resistance. According to some accounts, a peace agreement was mediated between Saladin and Sinan by Saladin's uncle, the governor of Hama, leading to a cessation of hostilities between the two factions. During the siege of Masyaf, one of the Assassins' strongholds, Saladin employed vigilant security measures to safeguard himself against potential threats. His guards were equipped with link lights, and chalk and cinders were scattered around his tent to detect any intrusions. According to one version of events, Saladin had narrowly escaped an assassination attempt when his guards noticed a spark descending the hill of Masyaf, leading to the discovery of a poisoned dagger and a threatening note left by the assassins. Saladin suspected Sinan himself to be behind this attempt on his life. Another account suggests that Saladin withdrew his troops from Masyaf due to the urgent need to confront a Crusader force near Mount Lebanon. However, in reality, Saladin sought to forge an alliance with Sinan and the Assassins, recognizing the strategic advantage of depriving the Crusaders of a potential ally. Subsequently, Saladin and Sinan maintained cooperative relations, with Sinan dispatching contingents of his forces to support Saladin in key battles against the Crusaders. This alliance underscored Saladin's pragmatism and his willingness to engage in diplomatic maneuvers to achieve his overarching objectives of consolidating power in the region and repelling external threats. After his campaign in the Al-Nusayriya Mountains, Saladin returned to Damascus and allowed his Syrian soldiers to return home, leaving Turan Shah in charge of Syria. He then departed for Egypt with only his personal followers, arriving in Cairo on the 22nd of September. Saladin had been absent from Egypt for roughly 2 years at this point, and upon his return he got busy to organizing and supervising various projects aimed at fortifying and reconstructing Cairo. One of Saladin's major initiatives was the repair and extension of the city walls, along with the commencement of construction of the Cairo citadel. He also ordered the construction of the Bir Yusuf, Joseph's Well, a deep well measuring 280 feet deep, which would serve as a vital water source for the city. Additionally, Saladin oversaw the construction of a large bridge at Giza, designated to bolster the city's defenses against potential Moorish invasions. Remaining in Cairo to supervise these improvements, Saladin also established educational institutions, such as the Madrasa of the Sword Makers and implemented reforms in the internal administration of the country. In the November of 1177, Saladin embarked on a raid into Palestine in response to the recent Crusader incursions into Damascus territory, deeming the truce no longer tenable. With a significant portion of the Crusader army engaged in besieging the fortress of Harim, north of Aleppo, southern Palestine was left relatively undefended. Capitalizing on this opportunity, Saladin led his army to Ascalon, which he referred to as the Bride of Syria. William of Tyre documented that Saladin's army comprised 26,000 soldiers, including 8,000 elite forces and 18,000 soldiers from Sudan. This formidable army proceeded to raid the countryside, sack Ramla and Lod, and extend their reach as far as the gates of Jerusalem, showcasing Saladin's military prowess and expanding his influence in the region. In November 1177, Saladin faced a significant setback at the Battle of Montegassard. Despite having a much larger army, Saladin hesitated to ambush the Crusades led by Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, fearing the skill of the Templar generals among them. Consequently, when Saladin and his men were surprised near Ramla, they were caught completely off guard. The Templar force, consisting of only 375 knights, engaged in close combat with the Ayyubid army, resulting in heavy losses for Saladin. Realizing that defeat was imminent, Saladin mounted a swift camel and retreated to the territories of Egypt. However, Saladin was undeterred by this defeat, and remained prepared to confront the Crusaders once again. In the spring of 1178, he camped near the walls of Homs and engaged in skirmishes with the Crusader army. His forces achieved victory over the enemy in Hama, capturing prisoners of war whom Saladin ordered to be beheaded for their actions against Muslim lands. Despite these victories, Saladin spent the remainder of the year in Syria, without further confrontation with his enemies. In April 1179, Saladin received intelligence indicating that the Crusaders were planning a raid into Syria. He deployed one of his generals, Farrukh Shah, to guard the Damascus frontier, and instructed him to light warning beacons upon sighting the enemy. When the Crusaders, led by King Baldwin, advanced too rashly in pursuit of Farrukh Shah's force, they were defeated by the Ayyubids. Encouraged by this victory, Saladin called for more reinforcements from Egypt to bolster his forces even more. During the summer of 1179, King Baldwin attempted to fortify Jacob's Ford, a strategic passage over the Jordan River. Despite Saladin's offer of a hefty sum to abandon the project. In response, Saladin resolved to destroy the fortress defended by the Templar Knights, moving his headquarters to Banias. The ensuing battle resulted in a decisive victory for the Ayyubids, with many high-ranking knights captured and the fortress falling to Saladin's forces. In the spring of 1180, Saladin, eager to commence a vigorous campaign against the Kingdom of Jerusalem, agreed to a truce proposed by King Baldwin. Droughts and bad harvests had hampered Saladin's supplies, making the truce a rather practical choice. Despite objections from Raymond of Tripoli, the truce was upheld after Saladin's naval fleet appeared off the port of Tartus, further compelling compliance from the Crusaders. In June 1180, Saladin hosted a reception for Nur ad-Din Muhammad, the Artukid Emir of Kefah, at Gyaksu, where he presented him and his brother Abu Bakr with gifts valued at over 100,000 dinars. This gesture was aimed at solidifying an alliance with the Artukids and impressing the other emirs in Mesopotamia and Anatolia. Earlier, Saladin had offered to mediate between Nur ad-Din and Kilish Arslan II, the Seljuk Sultan of Rum, who were in conflict over territorial disputes. Despite Saladin's attempts, Arslan refused to return the lands given to Nur ad-Din as a dowry for marrying his daughter, alleging mistreatment of her. Saladin was enraged when he received accusations from Arslan about his further abuses against his daughter by Nur ad-Din. Threatening to attack Malatya, Saladin demanded negotiations, leading to an agreement where Arslan's daughter would be sent away for a year, with strong repercussions if Nur ad-Din failed to comply. Returning to Cairo in early 1181, Saladin planned to observe the fast of Ramadan and then undertake the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. However, he changed his plans and was seen inspecting the Nile River banks. He faced conflicts with the Bedouin, whom he accused of trading with the Crusaders. Saladin then confiscated their grain and forced them to migrate westwards, deploying Ayyubid warships against the Bedouin river pirates. In the summer of 1181, a dispute rose involving Majid al-Din, a former deputy of Turan Shah in Zabid, Yemen. Saladin's administrator, Baha ad-Din Karakush, led a force to arrest Majd ad-Din, accused of misappropriating revenues. Despite protests of innocence, Majd ad-Din was released in exchange for a payment of 80,000 dinars. This incident highlighted the eternal strife following Turan Shah's departure from Yemen, with Saladin expressing frustration over the lack of returns from the province. Saif ad-Din's death in the June of 1181 led to his brother Is ad-Din inheriting the leadership of Mosul. Later, on December 4th of the same year, As-Salih, the crown prince of the Zengids, passed away in Aleppo. Before his death, he had his officers swear loyalty to Is ad-Din, seeing him as the only Zengid ruler capable of opposing Saladin. Is ad-Din faced challenges in managing both Aleppo and Mosul, prompting him to hand Aleppo to his brother Imad ad-Din Zangi in exchange for Sinjar. Saladin, respecting his previous treaty with the Zengids, did not oppose these arrangements. In the May of 1182, Saladin left Cairo for Syria with a significant portion of the Egyptian Ayyubid army. Despite warnings of potential Crusader interception, he chose the desert route across the Sinai Peninsula to Ayla, encountering no resistance. He ravaged the countryside near Montreal before arriving in Damascus. There he learned of Farrukh Shah's attack on the Galilee, and subsequently led his army into Galilee, sacking various towns. Although he faced a significant Crusader force near Belvoir Castle, the battle was inconclusive, and Saladin withdrew, due mainly to logistical difficulties. Afterwards, Saladin received an invitation from Kukbari, the Emir of Haran, to occupy the Jazira region in northern Mesopotamia, officially ending the truce with the Zengids. Crossing the Euphrates, Saladin besieged Aleppo briefly before proceeding to capture several cities in the Jazira region with the help of local allies. His victories included Edessa, Saruj, Raqqa, Kirkasiya, and Nusaybin, among others. Saladin's fair treatment of the conquered cities earned him quite a lot of praise, even among his enemies, as he abolished certain taxes and generally improved governance. As Saladin advanced in Mesopotamia, he received reports of Crusader raids near Damascus. Unperturbed, he focused on consolidating his control over the captured territories, while facing raids by Zangi, the Emir of Aleppo, on his northern cities. Despite these challenges, Saladin remained determined to expand his influence in the region. As he approached Mosul, he faced resistance from the Zengids, who appealed to an-Nasir, the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, for support. An-Nasir, influenced by his vizier who favored the Zengids, sent Badr al-Badr to mediate between Saladin and Izz-ad-Din. However, negotiations failed, as Izz-ad-Din rejected Saladin's terms, leading Saladin to lay siege to the city on November 10th, 1182. Facing a stalemate in the siege, and wanting to withdraw without damaging his reputation, Saladin decided to attack Sinjar, held by Izz-ad-Din's brother, Sharaf ad-Din. Sinjar fell after a 15-day siege on December 30th, although Saladin's soldiers plundered the city despite his efforts to protect its inhabitants. After establishing a garrison at Sinjar, Saladin awaited a coalition assembled by Izz-ad-Din, consisting of forces from Aleppo, Mardin, and Armenia. However, upon hearing of Saladin's approach, the coalition sent messengers requesting peace, and both sides returned to their cities without engaging in a battle. On March 2nd, 1183, Saladin received news from Al-Adil in Egypt that Reynald de Chatillon, a Crusader, had launched a raid in the Gulf of Aqaba, targeting towns and villages along the Red Sea coast. Although the raid was primarily piratical in nature, it alarmed the Muslims, who were not used to taking on such attacks from sea. In response, Saladin mobilized his warships from Fustat and Alexandria to the Red Sea, under the command of Lu, an Armenian mercenary. They broke the Crusader blockade, destroyed most of their ships, and pursued and captured those who fled into the desert. Saladin ordered the execution of the surviving Crusaders, numbering around 170, in various Muslim cities as a reprisal for their raid on the Red Sea coast. From Saladin's perspective, the war against Mosul seemed promising in terms of territorial gains, but he faced challenges as his army shrank due to some of his allies withdrawing their support. Despite this setback, Saladin and Taqi ad-Din pressed forward against the coalition, led by Is-ad-Din, marching eastward to Ras el-Ain without encountering resistance. After 3 days of intense fighting, Saladin's forces successfully captured Ayyubid by late April. Saladin handed over the city to Nur ad-Din Muhammad, who pledged allegiance to Saladin and promised to support him in future campaigns against the Crusaders. The fall of Ayyubid weakened Is-ad-Din's coalition, as it convicted Il-Ghazi of Mardin to join Saladin's service. In an effort to gain legal justification for taking over Mosul and its territories, Saladin appealed to the Abbasid Caliphate an-Nasir, requesting a document supporting his cause. Saladin argued that while he had conquered Egypt and Yemen under the Abbasid banner, the Zengids of Mosul had openly supported his rival Seljuks, and only sought the Caliph's support when needed. He accused Is-ad-Din's forces of hindering the Muslim war effort against the Crusaders. Saladin defended his actions, stating that his ultimate goal was to fight the Crusaders, eradicate the assassins, and rectify wrongs within the Muslim community. He promised the Caliph that if given control over Mosul, he would use it as a stepping stone to capture Jerusalem, Constantinople, Georgia, and other territories held by the Almohads in Maghreb. Saladin emphasized that all these conquests would be achieved by the will of God, and he offered territorial concessions to the Caliph in exchange for his support. After successfully capturing Aleppo, Saladin swiftly moved to secure his newly acquired territories. He sent his brother Taj al-Muluk Buri to capture Tel Khalid, northeast of Aleppo, which surrendered upon Saladin's arrival. From there, he marched towards Aintab, gaining possession of it with little resistance. On the 21st of May, he positioned his forces outside of Aleppo, encircling its suburbs in anticipation of capturing the city. Zangi, the ruler of Aleppo, did not offer much resistance, as he was unpopular among his subjects and wished to return to his previous city of Sinjar. Negotiations were conducted, and on the 12th of June, Aleppo was formally handed over to Saladin, in exchange for Zangi regaining control of Singar, Nusaybin, and Raqqa, with the condition that these territories would serve as vassals to Saladin. The people of Aleppo were surprised by Saladin's takeover, but some emirs welcomed him and pledged their allegiance. Saladin replaced the Hanafi courts with Shafi administration, despite his promise not to interfere in the city's religious leadership. Additionally, he allowed Zangi to take his belongings from the citadel and sold the remaining stores to replenish his own coffers. After spending a night in Aleppo's citadel, Saladin marched towards Harim, near Antioch, which was held by Surak. Saladin attempted to negotiate with Surak for the city's surrender, offering him Busra and property in Damascus in return. However, Surak's garrison forced him out, and Saladin's deputy arrested him on suspicion of planning to cede Harim to Bohemond III of Antioch. Saladin then arranged for the defense of Harim against the Crusaders, and agreed to a truce with Bohemond, while also assigning Azaz to Alam ad-Din Sulayman and Aleppo to Saif ad-Din al-Yazkaj, both of whom had supported him. These actions consolidated Saladin's control over the region and marked significant progress in his campaign against the Crusaders. Saladin's response to Crusader attacks, particularly by Reynald of Chatillon, was swift and decisive. Reynald's harassment of Muslim trading and pilgrimage routes on the Red Sea posed a significant threat, prompting Saladin to take action. In September 1183, Saladin crossed the Jordan River to attack Baisan, sacking and burning the town and intercepting Crusader reinforcements along the Nablus road. When the main Crusader force under Guy of Lusignan advanced, Saladin led his men to Ain Jalut, engaging in skirmishes and raids to weaken the Crusaders. Despite the Crusaders' reluctance to engage his main force, Saladin managed to inflict losses on them before withdrawing due to low provisions. He sought retribution against Reynald by besieging his fortress at Kerak twice, in 1183 and 1184. But both attempts were unsuccessful due to relief forces. Undeterred, Saladin resumed attacks on the territory of Izz-ad-Din around Mosul, which had allied with another powerful governor. However, facing illness and increased resistance, Saladin signed a peace treaty in March 1186. Reynald's continued provocations, including raiding a caravan of pilgrims, further fueled Saladin's determination to retaliate. Saladin vowed to personally slay Reynald for breaking the truce, and resolved to dismantle the entire Christian kingdom of Jerusalem in response. The culmination of Saladin's efforts came on the 4th of July 1187, with the Battle of Hattin, where his forces decisively defeated the Crusaders. Saladin captured Reynald, who was personally executed by Saladin in retaliation for his attacks against Muslim caravans. Guy of Lusignan, fearing a similar fate, was spared by Saladin, who emphasized Reynald's extreme transgressions as justification for his execution. The Battle of Hattin marked a critical turning point in the Crusades, cementing Saladin's reputation as a formidable adversary to the Crusader states. His capture of almost every Crusader city marked a significant milestone in the campaign to reclaim these Muslim territories. Despite preferring to take Jerusalem without bloodshed and offering generous terms, the inhabitants chose to resist, leading to a siege. Balian of Ibelin's threat to kill Muslim hostages and destroy holy shrines prompted Saladin to accept terms of quarter, allowing most inhabitants to leave Jerusalem within 40 days upon payment of a ransom. Patriarch Heraclius of Jerusalem organized the payment of ransoms for many citizens, while others were enslaved. Following the capture of Jerusalem, Saladin summoned the Jews and permitted them to resettle in the city, particularly those from Ascalon. Tyre, commanded by Conrad of Montferrat, remained a stronghold against Saladin's forces. In 1188, Saladin released Guy of Lusignan, who attempted to reclaim Tyre, but was refused admission by Conrad. Instead, Guy besieged Acre. Saladin's relations with Queen Tamar of Georgia were amicable, as she sought the return of confiscated possessions of Georgian monasteries in Jerusalem. Although the outcome of her request is unclear, Georgian pilgrims were allowed passage into the city. Queen Tamar also attempted to obtain the relics of the True Cross from Saladin, offering a substantial sum, but she was not successful. After his victories, Saladin contemplated invading Europe to extend his conquests, expressing his desire to free the earth of non-believers. This ambition underscores Saladin's determination and the far-reaching scope of his campaigns. The Third Crusade, prompted by the events of Hattin and the fall of Jerusalem, saw King Richard I leading Christian forces against Saladin. King Richard's siege of Acre resulted in the execution of almost 3,000 Muslim prisoners of war, with various accounts attributing different motives to the massacre. The armies of Saladin and King Richard clashed at the Battle of Arsuf, where Saladin's forces suffered heavy losses and were forced to retreat. Following this battle, Richard occupied Jaffa and restored its fortifications, while Saladin dismantled the fortifications of Ascalon to prevent it from falling into Crusader hands. Throughout the conflict, negotiations for a truce between Richard and Saladin took place, with various proposals being exchanged, including marriage alliances between their family. However, disagreements over compulsory religious conversions ultimately led to the rejection of these proposals. In January 1192, Richard's army occupied Beit Nuba, close to Jerusalem, but withdrew without attacking the Holy City. Instead, Richard focused on restoring fortifications in Ascalon. In July of 1192, Saladin attempted to threaten Richard's command of the coast by besieging Jaffa, but Richard arrived and defeated Saladin's forces. The Battle of Jaffa marked the end of military engagements in the Third Crusade. Richard and Saladin finally brokered a truce agreement, with Richard agreeing to demolish the fortifications of Ascalon, while Saladin recognized Crusader control of the Palestinian coast from Tyre to Jaffa. Additionally, Christians were allowed to travel unarmed as pilgrims to Jerusalem, and peace was maintained between Saladin's kingdom and the Crusader states, at least for the following 3 years. Saladin's death occurred on March the 4th, 1193, in Damascus due to a fever. At the time of his passing, he possessed only 1 piece of gold and 40 pieces of silver, having given away much of his wealth to his impoverished subjects. Consequently, there were no funds available to pay for his funeral. He was interred in a mausoleum situated in the garden outside the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, Syria. Originally, this tomb was part of a larger complex that included a school. Today, little remains of this school, except for a few columns and an internal arch. In later centuries, Emperor Wilhelm II of Germany donated a new marble sarcophagus to the museum. However, rather than replacing the original wooden sarcophagus. Both were kept in place. Visitors to the museum can now see both sarcophagi, with the marble one placed to the side and the original wooden one covering Saladin's tomb. And with that, we reach the end of our video, The Life of Saladin. If you've enjoyed it, why don't you get a little bit more of the content over at the Patreon? I'd like to thank my Mega Chad tier Patreon member Stark Factory for his glorious contributions to the channel. You could be one too. Just think about it. Other than that, like, comment, subscribe, you know I have to say it. But most of all, look after yourself and those around you, and don't do anything that I wouldn't do. I'll see you in the next video, everyone. Good night.